Hey, fifth graders. I am here with your lesson video on the plate tectonics notes. So we will have a separate separate video going through the guided notes with you. So this is just kind of the informational one. If you're able to fill out your notes as we go, awesome, great, that's wonderful. But if not, again, I'll go through the notes together in a separate video. I just can't switch between cameras for some reason. So we'll do the lecture video first, and then I'll do the guided notes lesson next, and then we'll post those for you. So here we go. The structure of the Earth and plate tectonics. So this is a really big concept in science, and so we're just going to kind of scratch the surface a little bit. So if some of it's over your head, that's okay. What I really want you to take away from this is that plate tectonics, what they do is they change the Earth's surface. We've been talking all about landforms, all about how our Earth changes. Plate tectonics is one of the ways that our Earth changes super slowly. So here we go. Ooh, maybe. So first, and I know this is on your notes, is the structure of the Earth. So on your notes, you've got the same picture, this little cutout of the Earth. So the Earth has four main layers. So we've got the inner core, the outer core, the mantle, and then the crust. So I like to think of this kind of like a pizza, where the crust, that's where we live, right on the outside. Then this is a nice hard surface. Then you have the mantle. This is actually liquid. And then we get back to the really hot outer core and inner core where it becomes solid again. So those are the four layers of our Earth. Now the crust, this is where we live, and there are actually two different kinds of crust. So in the crust, there is the continental crust. So this is the thicker crust. This is like the land where we live. So it is pretty buoyant, which means it's less dense, which means it's pretty light for its size. So it's kind of more like styrofoam, like super light, but hard and something you walk on. It is pretty old crust, whereas the oceanic crust, which is the crust underneath the ocean, is pretty thin, and it is more dense, so it's more heavy for its size. So think something like a rock, and it will sink underneath the continental crust. This is also mostly where more of our younger crust is formed. So what is plate tectonics? Again, this is going to be just scratching the surface of it. Plate tectonics, if you look at a map of the world, you might notice that some of the continents fit together like pieces of a puzzle. So here you can kind of see how this edge would fit really nicely along this edge. Same with right along here. Kind of fits really nicely right along here. So they kind of could move together and actually fit together. And the reason is because they used to be all together. Right? So the Earth's crust is divided into 12 major plates, which move in various directions. So this plate motion causes things to collide and to pull apart or to scrape against each other. So each type of interaction causes a characteristic set of the Earth's structures or tectonic features. So the word tectonic talks about kind of the breaking down of the crust. So again, this is a lot of stuff you probably don't need to know the details of, but it's good to know kind of the behind the scenes aspect of it. Now here are the world's plates. Some of them are, the names make a lot of sense to us, like the North American plate here encompasses North America. South American plate here, mostly South America, African, Eurasian. This one is just in the ocean. You've got some ones like the Nazca plate, the Australian plate, and the Indian plate. That one's an interesting one we'll talk about in just a bit. Now, these plate tectonics are made of the rigid lithosphere. So the lithosphere contains the crust and then the super upper parts of the mantle. So it's rigid, so it means it's kind of solid. Now, underneath it, below the lithosphere is called the asthenosphere. Again, not a word you'll have to know for a test or anything, but just kind of good general knowledge. And this is going to be the liquid part, so more of the mantle, that area. So plates move. The crust actually on our Earth moves. And so these plates kind of sit on top of this liquid underneath. And so the plates of the lithosphere, they're moved around by hot mantle convection cells. So those of you following along with your notes, those are red for a reason. Wink, wink, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. So the hot mantle convection cells are what actually move the plates. Since this inner core is so hot, what it does is it heats up the liquid. And then that liquid starts to rise because hot things rise. And then once it hits the surface, it actually starts to cool. And then as it cools, it starts to sink again. But then it heats up and it rises. And then it gets cool and it sinks. And it's going to continue this motion. Now, as it moves, it pulls the plates along with it. And so these plates can either pull apart or come together, or they can either slide side by side. And so this hot mantle convection cell is what moves our crust on our Earth. So at these plate boundaries, we've got all of our big plates all around, and now we know that they move. Okay, there are 3 different types of plate boundary interactions. We've got our divergent ones that pull apart, convergent means coming together, and transform means sliding side by side. So the Divergent series is a book series that some of you may have read. But again, divergent is to pull apart. Di means two in Latin, and so that means kind of pulling apart. So the plates are actually separating from each other. Convergent, you can think coming together because they will come together, convergent. And then transform is kind of the last goofy one that's sliding side by side. Now, each of these types of plate boundaries are going to have different interactions, and they're going to form different features on our Earth's surface. So these pictures might also look familiar in your notes. Hint, hint. All right, so at these divergent boundaries, so what happens is that the material is actually spread apart. Here, I'll pull this down here a little bit. There we go. So at the divergent boundaries, remember these hot mantle convection cells, they're stirring up liquid, kind of like when you boil water on the stovetop. Like this is like the stove. The water will rise and bubble and then cool and come down, rise and come down. So at this divergent boundary, as the plates move apart, new material is erupted to fill the gap. So here we see like a little bit of a ridge here, and new lava actually breaks the surface, cools, and creates new oceanic crust. And so this divergent boundary is really active underwater because this hot mantle is rising. This becomes lava. And so that actually rises to fill the space, and then it just creates new land, rises up, creates new land. And so that's how new oceanic crust is made. So you can tell, okay, so this map is a little hard to read at first. Here's North America. Do we see it? South America. Here's Africa over here. So the colors are actually the oceans. Because what this is a map of is this is a map that tells you the millions of years before the present. So red means pretty new. And blue means super duper old. So you can see all along these cracks in the ocean is pretty new crust, especially all the way down here, down the Atlantic Ocean. We can see the new crust is right along these plate boundaries. Because remember, as they're pulling apart, new lava fills and then cools and becomes Earth, becomes our oceanic crust. So we can see that near those plate boundaries, it's really new. Now, Iceland is a really neat example because in Iceland, this is an example of a continental rifting, meaning it is on a divergent plate boundary running right through the middle of the land. So Iceland is actually kind of growing in size as it pulls apart. There are all these active volcanoes along the country. So right through Reykjavik, which is the capital, are active volcanoes. So they do call this the land of fire and ice because, well, there's lots of fire and there's lots of ice. So kind of a neat continent. Country. I don't know why I said continent. Country. I'm sorry. Clearly not the social studies teacher. All right. So convergent boundaries, again, mean coming together. Now there are a couple different styles that can happen. So under your convergent notes, there's actually 3 different ones. The first one is our consonant collision. So this is when 2 continental crusts are coming together. Remember, these are your lighter ones, these are your thicker ones. So when they come together, they actually push each other up and they form mountains. Okay? Since they're the same kind of crust, when they come together, they just push up and they create mountains like the Himalayas. So the plates push together and make mountains. So the Himalayas are actually how this was formed. So like I said, we go back to this Indian plate because it used to be down by Africa, and it has since moved pretty quickly and pushed into the Eurasian plate. And it's actually still pushing in that direction today. So the Himalayas, that's why we have some of the tallest mountains in the world there, is because those two plates are coming together. Now the next one is your continent oceanic crust. This is called subduction. One plate is going to slide underneath the other plate. So we've got our thick continental crust, our thinner oceanic crust, and when they come together, the oceanic crust slides underneath the plate. Now it would be nice if it went whoop, but it doesn't. It goes and actually scrapes the whole way. It is not a very friendly meeting because they're rocks. And so rocks don't just slide like whoop, they are scraping. And so a couple different things can happen at this one. You can see some mountain ranges starting to form, although they're typically not as big as ones like in the Himalayas. But you also see then that oceanic crust that sinks can get reheated and also cause volcanic activity along those plates. So the oceanic lithosphere subducts underneath the continental lithosphere. And so the oceanic lithosphere heats and dehydrates as it subsides, meaning as it goes down and down and down. So this can form volcanism, like volcanoes, like in the Andes Mountains along the west coast of South America. The last interaction of the converging plates is your ocean-ocean plate collision. So just like when two oceanic plates collide, one runs over the other and forms a subduction zone. So this is kind of like two oceanic plates come together and then they both kind of sink. Now this can form a place called a trench. Now the world's deepest part of the oceans are found in these trenches, like the Mariana Trench, which is 11 kilometers deep. It's about 7 miles. So it's very, very, very deep. So these ocean-ocean plate collisions are super deep. All right. There's some weird things that can be found in there because it is so deep that there's not even light there. So you can see creatures that have neat little adaptations that often have really big eyes to try and see anything, but a lot of times they don't have much coloration. But they use tools to go and investigate those areas. All right, and lastly, we've got our transform boundaries. So this is where the plates slide past one another. So again, this is when they kind of just go side by side. So they're not coming together, not pulling apart, but they're kind of going side by side. Now, again, this is not going to be pleasant. This is going to be scraping. And this is actually the view of the San Andreas transform fault. Now, as these plates are sliding past each other, sometimes they get stuck and they're going, and then pressure builds and it builds up and it slides really fast. And that sliding really fast all at once can cause earthquakes. So this is the type of boundary that is in California at the San Andreas Transform Fault. That's why California has so many earthquakes. All right, so here we have all of our plates, all of the different interactions that there can be. So we're going to talk about volcanoes a little bit later on, but know that there is a strong connection about the Pacific Ring of Fire. So we'll go ahead and we'll go back to our notes in the next video. So make sure you watch that one to fill out your notes. Thank you. Bye.